Par exemple, expliquer une méthode, elle a expliqué par exemple dans cette page, après dans votre page, c'est comme ça, c'était un peu compliqué. Oui, oui.
Mais tu t'en rends compte quand tu prends un livre à la bibliothèque, tu regardes les explications, beaucoup plus simple. Pour la prochaine fois, je vais faire comme
Ça veut dire quoi dans la méthode communicative approach? La langue, par exemple, acted langue, ça veut dire acted locutoire, faire locutoire, il locutoire. Austin a dit dans la méthode communicative que pour acting de la langue, vous devez acting de la locutoire, acting, faire locutoire, acting et le locutoire, acting. Ouais. Pour communication, il y a 15 compétences qui est important. C'est
Et dans la task phase, dans les 4 task phases, c'est l'interaction.
oui.
Parce qu'il y a plus de l'apprenant, l'élève, et c'est acteur number one.
Oui. Learner center.
Alors avant, le learner, c'était un imitator. It's not imitating, but acting.
Apologies for being late this morning. Slightly late. Alright, so we will start with your homework. At home I asked you to read this, the article, well, I guess it's a full article actually. The article by Sheila Collingwood-Whittick on the Secret River. So what I want to do is to basically have a look at what you guys understand from it. Maybe there are some sections that you found problematic. I just want to have a look at, yes, basically what's in the essay. So what are some of the points? Obviously this is quite a long piece, so there are numerous points that are made. What are some of the points that you guys wrote down as being made in this article about the Secret River? What are some of the arguments that she makes? What did you find?
She talks about the erasure of Aboriginal name place as an omission of the colonial past.
As a what, sorry?
An omission of the colonial past.
I didn't get the word. Omission, okay, sorry, it was your fault. Okay, alright, so she does talk about place names. As you said, there's a dimension of Aboriginal place names being completely absent from the Secret River. Thank you. What else?
Since we are only point of view as a settler, we don't have a point of view of Aboriginals. We don't know the suffering they went through.
We don't know what,
The suffering they
have the point of view of settlers. We don't really have the direct point of view of Aborigines, and therefore it's difficult to reconstitute, to have a feel for their suffering in the novel. Alright, what else?
On the in the article, the author says that Kate Granville is actually a bit out of place as far as the historical tendency of looking at both sides is concerned. She's focusing on her ancestor, sort of history, and wrote, as she said, a book without any Aboriginal point of view. Well, it's a sort of, I thought this article a bit of a trial against Kate Granville, which I found a bit unfair, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do you guys agree with this? Obviously, you know, the material that I'm giving you is there for us to start thinking about the novels. These are not necessarily for you guys to take 100%. It's up to you to see whether you feel, you know, that this might be a little too harsh on Grenville, or that you feel that this is actually appropriate. I don't want to keep you guys from, you know, seeing where you want to. I don't want to tell you where I stand on this. Do you guys feel that this is harsh on Grenville and on the novel?
Not really.
Not really. Okay, so you're on the other side. You're like, yeah, you deserve all this.
In a way, yeah. No, for real.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I found, I don't know, but I was looking at the biography of the author as well. So she's a specialist of post-colonial studies. Actually works in France.
She's retired now.
Well, she's retired now. And I found the article a bit, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but I would say that, I would say it would have been a very, very relevant and very good article if Kate Granville's Secret River was an historic book. But it's not an historic book. It's a novel. So
yeah.
She can write basically whatever she wants. It's a novel. It's not a history book.
Okay, I guess this is the whole debate about The Secret River. Whether or not you consider that fiction has a responsibility towards how it narrates history. So to you, it doesn't. I think what we need to understand, for us it's quite easy coming from a French context to sort of go, well, who cares? Like, she can just take whatever point of view she wants to. This would be like a narration on the 2005 riots, you know, in France. You guys don't remember the riots that took place in the suburbs in France? Or it could be something about the Algerian Wars, or the use of torture during the Algerian War by the colonial government. So I think this is the level of sensitivity of the topic, and I think that's why there's so much debate about it. I guess there's no true answer to this. Yes, fiction should be independent. On the other side, fiction does have an impact on readers. So the answer is probably somewhere in between, that there is a level of responsibility, but obviously, as you said, this is not a historical novel. It's not even a book of history. So obviously she's not there to be responsible for telling history in the way that it happened, otherwise we're no longer in a novel. What is important to realise is how much of a debate this generates in Australia. You can really feel some of the tensions in Australia by seeing that this actually generates quite a lot of debate. Alright, what else? So someone feeling that this is a bit unfair, this is a bit too mean, Grenville's kind of nice.
Actually, I think that it's neither too mean or too fair. It's entirely depending on the critic point of view that you use to do that. Actually, the person who did the article, who wrote the article, were just thinking that you can totally separate the novel from the author. So it's one point of view, one critical way to see the thing, but on the other hand, there's another, that's a really French kind of critical method. But on the other hand, you can also see the text as with a special bond to the author, because it's her family story actually. So it's just two different kind of ways to see the novel. So neither of them are right or wrong, I think.
Okay, all right. I guess, as you say, we can consider that there is a whole different, array of reactions, that we can have a whole different sets of points of view. It's true that if you look at this in terms of a contemporary publication published during the history wars, from that point of view, this is a bit of a sensitive novel. On the other hand, Grenville, there's a lot of nuance in the novel. Like, Thornhill is not this perfect person. She could also have decided not to have him intervene in the massacre. Like, he actually kills someone in the massacre. This is a small concession of her to say that, yes, he is violent, not as much as others, but the whole thing is a little bit nuanced. So I guess she's not writing, she's not exonerating settlers that much in the novel. There are quite a lot of different ambiguous, ambivalent positions in the novel. Okay. What else did you find? Any other arguments or maybe other reactions to how you felt when reading this?
Yeah, she talks about victimization of the settlers. Is it the right word? Victimization of the settlers. Yeah, but as you said, she's very nuanced about it. So it's not all black or white, and obviously, when you read the story now, it's different from the context they had in Australia a few decades ago, or maybe years ago.
Yeah.
But I found Kate Grenville's Secret River a very good book, and that's in the way that Thornhill is not all good or bad. I mean, you have that massacre, which is a horrible scene in the book, but that's what I want to say. As you said, it's a very nuanced position. So again, I think the article doesn't take it into account.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because I think
one thing I can say is the fact that when you write an article, obviously you can only focus on one topic. So I think here she was interested in how names and namings were working. So she's not trying to explain the whole novel and to analyze all of it. This is not something you can do within the space of an article. Yes. Okay. Oh, we'll see about that later. Okay, what else do you guys have? Nina?
In the essay, the author explained that the Secret River is like a representation of Australians' reaction when they discovered the reality of the settlers' arrival in Australia. By naming the place and the characters like she did, Kate Grenville, in a way, pushed away the fact that the settlers were not obviously great people who discovered an empty land and realized incredible things. They had a bad impact on the Aborigines.
Okay, that's the end of it. Okay, I'm trying to remember the beginning of your argument, which I forgot.
The fact that the essay explains that the Secret River is a reaction, represents the reaction of Australians when they discovered the truth about the settlers' arrival.
I think, when you read The Secret River, it's difficult for The Secret River not to be considered in connection to its context, because she would have been writing during the years when the debates around the history wars were really strong. So Grenville, in every single decision she made, and there are a couple of decisions we haven't talked about yet, but she changed a couple of details from her ancestor's life, and these reveal quite a lot about her intentions. You'll see when we have a look at this later. but basically I think she can't really escape her context. I think it's a matter of how you see it, because she makes concessions each way. As you said, she does deconstruct terra nullius. She deconstructs the idea of Aborigines having no culture, having no, connection to place, having no sophistication. She completely deconstructs that in the novel, and I think we can quite fairly say that at the end of the novel, at least my impression is that she constructed Aborigines to be more sophisticated and more deserving of being in Australia than she does settlers. What she does, however, is to make excuses for the violence. I feel that this is what she is excusing. She's trying to explain this. To me, this is quite personal, but to me the big problem with the novel is the London bit. Because the London bit has no nuance. It's just constructing this really sad, suffering character. Like, it's almost parodic to me in the way that it constructs that character. But that's my personal reaction to it. To me, the sections in Australia are much more nuanced than this childhood was just so sad. There's so many bad things that happened to him, and so he's constructed as this really, this character that deserves so much more, that is hard-working. At least that's the way that I read it. And, it's up to you guys to see what you feel this is. Maybe to you the London past actually explains the whole novel. Maybe this is what gives meaning to the whole novel. It's up to you to see how you position yourself. There's no, there are as many reactions as there are readers to a novel, so it's up to you to see how you feel this. Maybe you feel that, yes, the novel is a success, it's very nuanced, as Ludovic was saying, or maybe you feel that, no, this novel pretends to be offering something nuanced when it's actually just legitimizing settler colonialism, and that's all it's doing. So it's up to you to see where basically you want to, how you read this in the first place. Let's have a look at, I'm guessing this was not too difficult an article. It looks like you guys had no particular trouble understanding it. No? Not particularly difficult. You can see here, this is on the second page, on page 28. This is basically her main argument, the fact that the novel constructs a fundamentally exculpatory explanation of frontier atrocity, that she basically justifies the atrocities not as being violence, but as being a set of reasons. Thornhill being pushed, he's the only one that's got the hope, it's the only way to stay on the land, he suffered so much in his childhood that he kind of had to do that frontier atrocity. So this is what she's trying to tackle in the article. And basically this is everything that she's arguing, that basically Grenville creates a really acceptable story of the frontier. She takes into account those changes in Australian history where the more violent side of the frontier and the more violent side of colonisation were emphasised from the 1990s onwards, but it's what she does with it that she's actually interested in. Je vais le retrouver. There we are. So on page 13 of the article, I guess this is, her main argument is not that there's a problem with the representation of settlers. I think her main argument is really that this redirects attention from what should be the main focus of the novel. Okay, basically, her assumption in the article is that it should have been the suffering of Aboriginal people that should have been the most evoked, that should have been the most detailed, whereas here, if you think about suffering in the novel, most of the suffering that is described is the suffering of Thornhill. Okay, so to her, there's a problem that this actually diverts attention. There's so much emphasis on settler suffering that this diverts attention from the real issue, from the real problem, which is the fact that Aborigines basically suffered from this. So you have this here, this is what she evokes here, blah, 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 blah. By thus encouraging the reader to view the settler condition in terms of the pathos of exile, this this representational maneuver works to divert attention from the grim truth about the colonisation of Australia, namely the multiple and ongoing traumas the settler presence provoked among Australia's Indigenous peoples. Honestly, to me, I'm not sure. There are some things that I find really unsettling. It is true that there's no Aboriginal perspective whatsoever, and the idea of suffering is mostly with the settlers. On the other hand, I think it's a very clever way of getting white Australians to engage with the violent side of their history. Because Thornhill is nuanced, it's like even nice-ish people engaged in violence, and she explains the psychological sort of mechanisms that lead to the possibility of that violence. That is trying to show how ordinary people can fall into that violence. It's not just sadistic, crazy, violent criminals that engaged in frontier violence. This was due to a series of circumstances. So I think in terms for a white Australian audience, I think it's quite a nuanced way to force them to think a little bit about this. Obviously for an Aboriginal audience, there's very little in this for them, in this novel. Alright. Okay, there's another point that we haven't evoked which is quite central in this. And it's on this page, so page 33 of the... on page 33 of the PDF, right towards the end of that page, you can see that she argues that there's a very anachronic way of describing Thornhill's relation to the land. Did you guys understand this argument? What she talks about, that connection to the land? What is she trying to say there?
She sentimentalizes this relation as if it felt the same way about the land as the Aboriginal people did. In fact, most settlers were just interested in economic profits of land.
Yeah, okay, that's summarized very efficiently. Yeah, pretty much she argues this, that today, this sort of connection to the land, which is based on basically falling in love with the beauty of the land, at the time would probably have been irrelevant. The settlers that were settling in areas might have liked the countryside. We actually have a lot of evidence that shows that most settlers did not really like aesthetically the Australian landscape. They found it too harsh. But basically, the places where people would settle were the places that were the most fertile. Okay, people were not settling in the prettiest areas. The idea was to settle on the most fertile land to make sure that they would get a lot of food, a lot of agriculture, a lot of crops out of it. Okay, so what she argues is rather that what Collingwood Whittick says is that Grenville actually uses our contemporary ways of connecting with the landscape in a way of having, of loving the aesthetic qualities of the landscape, rather than looking at how they would have connected with that. Because there is this sense that Thornhill loves his land so much that he kind of has to sacrifice things for it. And the sacrifice involves violence towards Aboriginal people. So this is one problem that she finds. And another issue is, of course, that this connects with how Aboriginal people connect to the land. Okay, the way that Thornhill is supposed to have this, you know, the sublime almost coming from that landscape. This is also, in a way, in competition with the Aborigines' connection to the land. Bon, le fait qu'elle essaie vraiment de créer cette connexion entre Thornhill et l'endroit où il est, quelque part ça entre en compétition avec la connexion particulière que peuvent avoir les aborigènes avec leur territoire. D'accord? Donc dans le roman, vous avez ça qui, bien sûr qu'à l'époque, il y allait avoir des colonisateurs qui auraient pu avoir une relation assez particulière, on va dire d'un point de vue esthétique, d'adorer l'endroit où ils étaient. Mais c'est vrai qu'au départ, la terre, c'est quoi? C'est ce qui vous permet de vivre, c'est ce qui vous permet de cultiver, etc. Donc c'est vrai que ce que dit Collingwood Whittick, c'est que pour elle, il y a une surutilisation de cet aspect-là, de l'amour que peut avoir Thornhill pour cette terre-là. D'accord? Donc c'est ce que vous vous avez ici, she proposes a colonial fairy tale in which settler acquisition of Aboriginal territory is spun as a story of love at first sight. And it's true, if you read again that section when he first goes on the Hawkesbury with Blackwood, there's that moment of love, and he can't stop thinking about the land and all of that. Et ce que j'ai essayé de reformuler, c'est ce que vous avez sur la page d'après, dans le paragraphe de milieu, this mimetic appropriation of traditional Aboriginal relationships with country. Vous savez que country, quand les Aborigènes l'utilisent, c'est pour parler de leur terre à eux, is of course an absurd anachronism in a novel set in the first decades of the 19th century. What's this? So she's insisting as well on this notion, the notion of perpetrator trauma. The fact that even as a perpetrator, you can have a form of trauma. Obviously, if you are committing an act of violence, extreme violence, you're going to suffer from it. And it's true that pretty much at the end of the novel, the focus is on that, with Thornhill looking through his long view. This is about him trying to manage the trauma of that violent act. Okay, so again, she's saying that the center of the story should be Aboriginal suffering. But then again, you know, this is the whole question about whether or not novels have this responsibility. Novels are not history. All right. Any questions about this article? Anything that you found particularly problematic? Okay, so what I want to do is to take just a little bit of time to read from Searching for the Secret River. Oh, hold on. What did I do? Okay, I'll have you read the rest for your homework. You'll see the juicier bit. But I just want to read together the final page here. Donc si vous prenez la page 21 du PDF, vous avez juste une section très courte. Pas besoin de lire les premiers paragraphes, d'accord? Tout ça, ça sert à rien de le lire là. Ici, il faut commencer à Back in Sydney, I made some decisions. Et ça, c'est sur les décisions qu'elle a prises par rapport à la représentation des aborigènes. Donc je vous laisse lire, c'est assez court. Donc à partir de la fin du bas, la page 198 jusqu'à la page 199. You going to these? So you can see in this some of the decisions that she made. You can see the second page in particular talks about how she could get information on Aborigines. So the fact that she used Blackwood, she used the fact that Thornhill could actually deduct things for himself. It's true that because she wrote it mostly from the point of view of Thornhill, she was limited by this. So you can see some of the decisions that she made. You can see as well that the decision not to have Aboriginal characters speak is a very conscious one. She basically decided this was a willful choice. I think in this you can see the fact that she tried to avoid caricature, that if obviously she can't have them speak in the native language because she doesn't speak it, so she would have had them speak in broken English. If they'd had really sophisticated English, it wouldn't have sounded natural, but if she had had them speak in broken English, they would have sounded less sophisticated than she could without having them utter any words. Okay, so you can see some of the changes that some of the decisions that she made basically to avoid a caricatured representation of Aboriginal characters. Another thing that she does is to basically show, you can see in this that she basically chose to create a hollow in the book, as what she calls a space of difference. That is, she deliberately showed only Thornhill's point of view, but tried to hint at the fact that there was a lot of sophistication in Aborigines' way of life. This is her way of choosing, basically you can see that she refused to address the Aboriginal side, to basically not tell the story partially, but to hint at the fact that there's a whole story there. So it's up to you to see whether you consider this to be a problem, or whether you consider this to be quite clever. The fact of basically not even touching on the Aboriginal side, to suggest that there is a Darrow consciousness, qu'il y a vraiment une perception du monde qui est différente, beaucoup de sophistication dans la culture, etc. But she basically chooses not to address it to make sure that she wouldn't address it in a limited way. Okay? If she had chosen to have the Aboriginal characters say a couple of words here and there, and to give a little bit of focalization on Aboriginal characters, then I guess everything that Collingwood Whittick suggested would be 100% the case, okay, because she would really have limited the Aboriginal dimension. I guess one point is that Grenville basically decided not to enter that ground to have the most efficiency. Donc bien sûr, vous pouvez l'interpréter de deux manières. Soit vous dites, bah, elle n'a même pas essayé, donc c'est encore pire, soit bah, justement, elle n'a pas essayé, elle n'a pas tenté de réduire ça à quelques petites scènes ou des choses très caricaturales, parce qu'en plus, elle ne se focalise pas sur les personnages aborigènes. À vous de voir un petit peu comment vous l'avez ressenti aussi quand vous avez lu le roman. One thing I do need to mention, however, is that in the Australian context, it's extremely difficult for a non-Aboriginal writer to write about Aborigines. They're always attacked from all sides by everyone. So as you can see, they're attacked whether or not they write about Aborigines. But if they do represent Aboriginal characters, sometimes it can be very difficult for them. The situation is tense to the level that sometimes it's very difficult for non-Aboriginal people to speak about Aboriginal issues. Okay? It's that tense today. Donc vous pouvez, this is something that she evokes here towards the bottom of the first page. She says all that, their inside story, their responses, their thoughts, their feelings, all that was for someone else to tell, someone who had the right to enter that world, and the knowledge to do it properly. This is a direct reference to the fact that she considers that only Aboriginal writers can actually have access to that world and can tell that story properly. Now this in itself can be problematic, okay? Again, we're in the world of fiction. Why couldn't a white writer write about Aboriginal consciousness or try to do research to write characters that are Aboriginal? But in the case of Australia, this is a very sensitive topic, okay? Very thorny issue of who can actually represent Aboriginal people, how they're being represented, and it is true that at the moment, the dominant idea is that only Aboriginal people can represent themselves, or Aboriginal people can best represent themselves. En soi, bien sûr, c'est problématique, d'accord? Parce que quand vous écrivez en tant qu'aborigène, vous n'avez pas forcément envie d'écrire en tant que représentant de ce groupe. Vous pouvez avoir envie d'écrire de la littérature juste pour écrire de la littérature. Donc ça pose toute une série de questions autres, mais il faut voir qu'il y a quand même cette idée-là qui est dans la littérature en Australie. D'accord? Cette idée qu'il y a des choses qui sont un peu des chasses gardées, en fait. Ça, c'est vrai que c'est pas quelque chose qui existe forcément beaucoup, on va dire, dans nos littératures. Ça va? So you've got the crispy news I'll give you for your homework. The other pages to read, you'll see there's an interesting decision that Grenville made about her ancestors' past. So what I want to do for the rest of the class today is to speak a little bit about dissertations and to work on dissertation topics. You know that for the exam you can either have a dissertation or a commentary. Okay, so on the day of the exam you'll have one or the other. If you have so you can have one or the other. In any case, the topic that you will get will be comparative. Okay, so I'll be asking you, you won't get The Secret River or Remembering Babylon or Judith Wright. You'll get, say, if it's a commentary, an extract from The Secret River that you're supposed to work on together with Remembering Babylon. Je veux qu'on ferme... Vous voulez qu'on tire les rideaux? Est-ce que... Je vais passer... Je pense pas que j'ai le bon rideau, moi. Allez. N'hésitez pas si vous avez besoin. Thank you. So you will get, obviously we've got 3 works, so you'll either get Secret River with Judith Wright with Remembering Babylon, or Secret River and Remembering Babylon. Okay, so 2 basically works, so 2, either for the commentary or the dissertation. So obviously one of the things that you guys need to do at home when you prepare for the exam is to start thinking about some of the connections between the works. So together we'll be studying the works, you know, trying to debate about the works, and then it will be up to you in the exam to really engage with the comparative dimension. So of course together in class we'll talk about some of them. There are some obvious parallels between some of them, but do remember this dimension, that it will be comparative. As part of this, what I'm asking you to do is not to do separate parts for each work. D'accord? Si je vous dis, bah voilà, 2 extraits, un de The Secret River, un de Judith Wright, comparez-les, bah si vous faites partie 1, extrait 1, partie 2, extrait 2, vous n'avez pas fait une comparaison, vous avez fait 2 analyses séparées. Donc c'est vraiment important de vous forcer au niveau du plan, que ce soit un commentaire ou une dissertation, à faire un plan qui va inclure des analyses réellement comparatives. Après, bien sûr que dans chaque partie, c'est possible ici et là d'avoir une idée que vous développez sur un roman plutôt qu'un autre. Ça, bien sûr, c'est possible, mais il faut absolument que ce soit comparatif, d'accord? Que l'argumentation soit comparative. If you have a commentary, you will not be allowed to have the works with you, okay? Because you've got the topic there. If you have a dissertation, you have the right to have the works with you. D'accord? Je vous donne le droit dans le cadre d'une dissertation. Pour un commentaire, vous avez les textes sur lesquels vous devez travailler, donc je ne vous donne pas accès aux ouvrages. En revanche, si vous avez une dissertation, vous avez droit aux ouvrages. Cependant, ce que je vous demande, bien entendu, c'est pour les poèmes de Judith Wright. C'est par exemple de les réimprimer, il doit y avoir 6 pages, d'accord? Si vous avez mis des notes dans tous les sens, pas forcément, il ne faut pas qu'il y ait trop d'annotations, donc réimprimez-les, amenez-les avec vous. Et puis pour le cas de Remembering Babylon et The Secret River, qui n'est pas de notes, d'accord? Donc bien sûr, si vous avez commencé à souligner des choses comme ça va, mais il ne faut pas qu'il y ait des notes sur les pages, des choses comme ça, d'accord? Donc ça, on a le droit de vérifier pendant l'examen qu'il n'y ait pas de notes, notamment des notes sur des citations, des choses comme ça. Mais pour la dissertation, vous aurez droit aux œuvres. Donc après, vous avez le droit de ne pas les amener. Je sais qu'il y a des étudiants qui m'avaient dit qu'ils les avaient empruntées, rendues à la BU, etc. Donc c'est à vous de voir un petit peu. Mais c'est sûr que ça peut vous aider à trouver des citations pour la dissertation. C'est un petit peu plus simple. Un commentaire, vous avez déjà les thèmes sur lesquels vous travaillez. So that's the point. So what I want to do today is to speak about dissertation topics and the types of topics that you can get. And then later on in the semester, we'll do a little bit of work on the commentary. I mentioned last week that there will be a practice exam, so I'll put one online and then you guys can do it at home and you can see what is expected of you. So this, I forgot to mention, the Secret River was adapted as a play. This is the scene that we looked at last week with the fire. So you've got Dick, Long Jack, and you've got Thornhill there that are represented as in the play. Alright. So, if you get a dissertation, you can have different types of topics. Now, I'm sure you guys have all worked on dissertations before. There's nothing too new about what I'm going to ask you to do. Honestly, what I am interested in is for you guys to think about the novel and to give me your reading of the novel. Je suis là dans les cours, hein. Ça ne m'intéresse pas que vous me ressortiez ce dont on a parlé ensemble dans le cours. Bien sûr qu'il faut que je vois que vous comprenez le contexte, que vous comprenez le roman, etc. Mais ce qui m'intéresse, c'est votre analyse. Et j'ai besoin que vous me montriez que vous avez réfléchi au roman en faisant référence, par exemple, à des choses auxquelles on n'a pas fait référence ensemble. Donc, par exemple, des fois, j'ai des dissertations où les étudiants, ils se basent uniquement sur ce dont on a parlé en cours. Ah, la scène avec le feu, machin, ah oui, super, t'étais en cours, parfait. Qu'est-ce que toi, à quoi t'as réfléchi sur le sujet? D'accord? Il faut vraiment vous dire que vous avez le droit d'analyser, vous avez le droit de réfléchir. C'est pour ça que sur The Secret River, moi, je ne veux pas vous dire c'est comme ça qu'ici. Il y a plein de façons de le lire, ce roman. Il y a plein de façons de le percevoir. Il y en a qui vont se sentir agressés par ce roman, oui. Et il y en a qui vont se sentir, qui vont beaucoup apprécier le roman, Ludovic. Et au milieu, il y a plein de positions différentes. Moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est de voir votre position, comment vous l'argumentez aussi. Peut-être que vous trouvez que c'est un roman extrêmement nuancé, au contraire, vous trouvez que c'est un roman caricatural, j'en sais rien. Mais moi, ce qu'on veut avoir de vous en L3, c'est vraiment ça. D'accord? On n'est plus dans une optique scolaire, on est aussi dans une optique où on veut voir, vous, ce que vous avez à proposer vraiment. So, remember, of course, I'll be expecting you guys to know about certain notions that we've looked at together. You remember we read an article where we talked about selective amnesia in settler colonialism. All sorts of things like that. You see that as we progress, il y a un bout de rideau qui n'a pas été tiré. Et quelqu'un au soleil, je ne sais pas lequel c'est. Je pense que c'est peut-être celui-là. C'est juste celui-là, ouais, pardon. C'est pas celui-là. Désolée, ça doit être celui-là là-bas. Ah si, c'est bon. Parfait. Ah, non, c'est plus bon. Faut pas se pencher. Alright, so, qu'est-ce qu'on raconte? Oh yes, we'll be talking about different notions as we go. You need to understand the theory that we've been talking about, and of course on the day of the exam I need you to demonstrate that you've understood. You remember we had a week where we talked about settler colonialism and the dynamics in settler colonialism, the centrality of land. I need you guys to prove that you understand this and to use it in the way that you think about the novels. Okay, so there needs to be a point where you show that you've read the novels, that you've understood the novels, that you've understood the theory for the class. And then I want you to show how you guys read the novels. So you can have different forms of topics for a dissertation. The first type of topic that you can have is just a notion, so analyze this notion. So for instance, c'est des sujets au pif, c'est juste pour vous montrer des exemples. So I can ask you to analyze amnesia in The Secret River and this. So you can see you only have one notion, and you're supposed to analyze this one notion in 2 novels. So in these types of topics, what you guys really need to do is to sit down for a while and think about the notions themselves. Okay, so I got you another example where this is more obvious, violence in the Secret River and another novel. You really need to take some minutes and think about the various different meanings that the notion can take. D'accord? Donc, c'est important, par exemple, si vous avez un sujet sur la violence, de vous arrêter 2 minutes, de ne pas partir directement sur le premier sens auquel vous avez réfléchi. La violence, ici, c'est l'exemple de base. Vous avez bien sûr la violence physique, mais après, vous pouvez avoir une violence psychologique, une violence sociale, une violence de genre, une violence, il peut y avoir plein de formes de violence, d'accord? Donc dans le cas d'une notion, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est vraiment s'arrêter, réfléchir en dehors des romans à tous les sens que la notion, elle peut avoir. Et ensuite voir si ces sens, ils sont présents ou pas. Peut-être qu'il y a beaucoup de choses sur la violence physique, mais rien sur la violence psychologique. Inversement, c'est tout sur la violence psychologique. J'en sais rien. À vous de voir un petit peu ce que vous trouvez ou pas. Mais il faut vraiment prendre le temps de réfléchir à la notion. And of course, you'll have to make changes. It's possible, for instance, if you're supposed to analyze violence in the Secret River and Remembering Babylon, that you're going to choose to focus on 2 main types of violence, psychological and physical violence. You can say this in the introduction and basically justify it. Okay, it's possible for you guys to make choices if it's too much to analyze all the different types of violence in the Secret River and Remembering Babylon, because I need you to basically create a dissertation that has a sense. Okay, the idea is not to make a list of all the different events of violence. The idea is to basically generate an argument about how violence is used or the functions that it serves in the novel and another one. Ça va? Now this is also, I guess this is nothing new for you guys, but you can also have a quotation. So I'm going to ask you to discuss a quotation that, a quotation full stop. The quotation can be on the novel, on one of the novels. So I gave you an example here, ce sera tout en ligne, si vous n'avez pas envie de vous embêter. The Secret River, ça c'est une citation de Collingwood Whittick. Donc, betrays a refractory tendency to portray Australia's past in a sentimental light. Discuss. Okay, so I can be asking you, we haven't worked on the other novels yet, so I just want to speak about the Secret River. But here, you can see that this topic requires you to have read Collingwood Whittick, to remember the arguments that she makes, okay, to be able to understand this quote, and then to try to discuss this. Does the Secret River really portray Australia's past in a sentimental light? Okay, and then you need to think about whether or not this is true. And of course, as you can see, you need to have on arrête de parler, écrivez-vous des mots. So try to see as well, sorry, I lost it. If this is the case, you also need to remember, of course, for this type of topic, what the argument of Collingwood Whittick is generally, so you can also add some of the elements that she addresses. The quotation, j'en ai mis là. J'ai mis ça aussi, the text of the Secret River makes it clear that the authority remains with Aboriginal characters. Okay, so here, if you're being asked to discuss, it's up to you to consider whether this is true, whether this is false. Honestly, most of the time you'll come up with a nuanced answer that is, it's true to the extent that it's false in this sense. Okay, so don't say it's black or white. Most of the time it's going to be somewhere in the middle when you discuss things. You can also have quotations that deal more specifically with a concept. D'accord? Donc certaines citations qui peuvent être sur un des 2 romans, et ensuite il faut voir si cette citation, s'applique à ce roman-là, il faut s'appliquer au deuxième, ou alors une citation qui porte directement sur un concept. Donc par exemple, ici j'ai pris un extrait de Veracini. D'accord? Victimologies allow suffering to become an essential vehicle for legitimacy in a settler colonial context. So here you're supposed to think about the mechanisms of victimology narrative in the Secret River, and something else that we haven't read yet. And then I've got you a second example here. Settler colonialism is a profound and extensive rearrangement of physical spaces and people. Is this represented in the Secret River? How is it represented in the Secret River? So, if you have, ça c'est juste ce qu'on a vu mais sur une slide. If you have a topic on a quotation, what you need to do is really sit down, just like for a notion, and try to think about what the quotation actually means. What is it that you're going to have to discuss? So if we take this one, the second one, the text of the Secret River makes it clear that the authority remains with Aboriginal characters. In the case of a quotation, you really need to think about the major words that are being used, maybe the major concepts, what do they mean, what's the main argument in this sentence, and therefore, what is the center of what you're supposed to discuss. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut en faire ici de ça? Qu'est-ce que je vous veux là? What are some of the questions when you unpack, when you deconstruct this topic that you need to raise? What are you supposed to discuss? So here you can see that you've got someone arguing that in the Secret River there's something clear that is happening. So one of the things that you can discuss is this idea, whether it's clear or not. Maybe this is something that's implied, maybe it's something that's ambiguous. Okay, so this is one of the first things that you can consider in your discussion. Aboriginal characters, here you'd obviously need to think about the various Aboriginal characters that are evoked. You could see in the extract that we've read from Grenville that she also includes the country as being connected to Aboriginal characters. So here you can see how you're going to define Aboriginal characters. Then you need to worry about these two, okay? The authority remains with them. What does that basically mean? Does it mean that they are above in terms of authority? What does authority mean, actually? What's really missing in this, and what you guys will need to talk about, is what authority actually refers to. C'est quoi l'autorité? C'est quand vous avez une légitimité et que vous point, ou alors est-ce que c'est quand vous avez une légitimité et qu'en plus vous pouvez agir pour faire respecter cette légitimité-là? D'accord? C'est quoi l'autorité en fait? Est-ce que c'est vraiment que vous arrivez à mettre en forme quelque chose, une forme de domination ou pas? Parce que si vous interprétez l'autorité comme étant le fait de faire respecter une hiérarchie, bah non, les aborigènes, ils n'y arrivent pas forcément, en tout cas pas directement dans The Secret River. Donc c'est à vous de définir ce terme-là, authority, pour voir comment est-ce que vous allez pouvoir l'analyser. Ça, il faut que ça se passe dans l'introduction. Comment est-ce que vous allez définir authority? Et vous êtes, je sais pas, on est 40, on va dire, bah, sur 40, il y aura forcément 40 définitions un petit peu différentes. Et si vous définissez l'autorité de manière très stricte, comme étant, par exemple, une forme de légitimité qui, en plus, est mise en place dans la société, d'accord, de manière directe, bah là, vous allez produire une dissertation qui est très différente d'un étudiant qui va considérer l'autorité comme étant, par exemple, une forme de sophistication, la reconnaissance, par exemple, que Thornhill a, que les aborigènes sont au-dessus de lui sur plein de choses. D'accord? Donc c'est à vous vraiment de définir ces termes-là. Surtout, ce qui manque ici, c'est authority to do what? Okay. Well, authority on what? On who? To do what? You really need to think about this. What do they have authority over? And this is where you can get to start thinking about the novels. In The Secret River, what are the moments of authority? You remember that scene with the fire? We do have Thornhill trying to get authority using the gaze, using his words, using also, undermining Aborigines to try to get authority back over his son, when Long Jack has this natural authority and natural knowledge, which comes basically from his skills. Okay, so you can really see that you've got different forms of authority here that are at work. This is in just one example. Your work is, of course, to think about this in the whole novel and in the other work. Ça va? faut vraiment essayer de vous poser ces questions-là, d'accord? Pas juste dire l'autorité, hop, vous partez sur un truc genre ouais, l'autorité parentale, les Aborigènes, ils n'ont pas trop de choses là-dessus. Il faut vraiment réfléchir. L'autorité, qu'est-ce que c'est? Comment est-ce que vous allez la définir pour votre travail? Donc en introduction, posez-le de manière simple, il n'y a pas besoin de se prendre la tête. Donc voici la définition d'autorité que je vais prendre en compte. Oui, ça peut être défini comme ça, comme ça, comme ça, mais là, ce qui va s'appliquer le plus pour les romans, c'est cette forme d'autorité. Une chose qui manque là, c'est l'autorité sur qui, sur quoi, sur de faire quoi dans le roman. Et là, ensuite, c'est à vous de réfléchir comment vous voulez articuler ce que vous avez trouvé dedans. Ça va? Donc c'est vrai qu'au niveau, on va dire, de la notion, ce qui est pas difficile, mais c'est vraiment de s'asseoir et de réfléchir à ce mot-là, quels sont tous les échos que le mot peut avoir. C'est sûr que vous allez passer un tout petit peu plus de temps à réfléchir au sujet lui-même quand vous avez une citation, parce que la citation, il faut vraiment aller décortiquer qu'est-ce qu'on essaye de vous faire pour ce sujet-là. D'accord? Donc si on prend par exemple ce sujet-là ici, qu'est-ce que je vous veux? Si je vous dis, alors réfléchissez à ça dans The Secret River and something else we haven't talked about. So settler colonialism is a profound and extensive rearrangement of physical spaces and people. Je précise, j'en mets des affreux en cours, comme ça, quand vous avez un truc à l'examen, c'est un peu plus simple. Hein. C'est mieux que dans l'autre sens, genre en cours, c'est facile, les jours d'examen, paf, une horreur. Parce que vous allez voir, après on va travailler sur un sujet qui on va bien rigoler. So, what do I want with this?
Yeah, so what I would probably do is this quotation is sort of now what we know and think and know about settler colonialism. So with the knowledge we have now and the study that have been made about settler colonialism, we know that for sure. But in the books, was this the point of settlers to rearrange physical space and people? You know what I mean? You don't.
I see what you mean.
It's true, but
yeah.
it's true, yes, but at the time, was it the point of colonialism in Australia?
Okay, that's a historian's question. That's not a question for fiction.
Yes, true.
But I see what your question is, but the way you need to frame it is, okay, this is how, as you said, researchers analyze the dynamics of settler colonialism. What you need to say is this represented in The Secret River? And how is it represented? What are the mechanisms for showing this? You can't say, was it true at the time? To answer that question, you need to go into archives of letters of settlers and see how they perceived it. So you need to consider, as you said, whether or not this is how the mechanisms of settler colonialism are analysed today. Profound, extensive rearrangement of physical spaces and people. Okay, so the idea that in settler colonialism, because you've got an invasion by settlers, you're going to have a rearrangement of peoples and physical spaces. D'accord? Les déplacements qui ont lieu de par la nature même du colonialisme de peuplement, vous avez un déplacement de peuple et un déplacement d'espace physique. D'accord? Donc par exemple dans The Secret River, vous pouvez réfléchir aux poissons. D'accord? À la fin, vous avez la villa qui est sur le poisson qui avait été dessiné par les aborigènes. Ça, c'est un réarrangement, une réorganisation de l'espace. Les peuples qui sont poussés aussi, d'accord? Les aborigènes qui sont poussés, le fait qu'il y a le camp, etc. What you need to discuss, so of course you need to think about this. What's rearrangement? What are physical spaces? What do you include in this? Do you only include crops? Do you also include, I don't know, the forest, the different uses that are made of the countryside? What do you include in physical spaces? And then peoples, well, this is a bit more obvious, obviously. So here, what you can discuss is whether or not you do have this rearrangement of physical spaces and people. Maybe there's one that dominates over the other in a novel. Maybe there's a novel that only speaks about the rearrangement of physical spaces and not of people. C'est vrai que quelque part, ce que vous avez dans The Secret River, c'est que Thornhill, il vient, il occupe l'espace. À chaque fois qu'il voit les aborigènes, il fait « ça c'est chez moi ». Il dessine un truc, il fait « c'est chez moi, vous me cassez maintenant ». Et en fait, même à la fin du roman, les aborigènes, ils sont encore là. C'est-à-dire le seul survivant, il est encore à cet endroit-là. Donc est-ce qu'on a vraiment un réarrangement des populations? Oui, il a réarrangé l'espace parce qu'il a planté ses peupliers, ses érables, ses machins, ses arbres européens, mais finalement, il n'a pas réellement déplacé les aborigènes. D'accord? Donc vous pouvez réfléchir un petit peu à tout ça. And of course, you can also think about whether or not you agree with this idea that this was profound and extensive. Maybe you can consider that this was limited or that it was limited to something or another. Okay, so the idea is to really break down the quotation and to evaluate whether each section of the quotation can be used to describe accurately the novel. Donc en gros, c'est un travail de nuance, d'accord? C'est un travail de vraiment expliciter de manière très claire ce que veut dire la citation, quel est le cœur de la citation. Ici, le cœur, c'est de réfléchir aux transformations amenées par le colonialisme de peuplement. Il faut réfléchir à ces transformations en termes de population et en termes d'espace. C'est à peu près ce qu'on vous demande de faire. Et ensuite, à vous d'amener de la nuance, d'amener des choses, de dire aussi peut-être qu'il y a d'autres transformations, d'accord? Peut-être qu'il y a d'autres réorganisations dans The Secret River auxquelles vous avez réfléchi, qui ne sont pas mentionnées par cette citation, mais que vous allez pouvoir ajouter dans une partie. Ça va? Any questions about this? Eh bien, je vous propose de faire une pause et on se rejoint un super sujet pour rigoler.
Ah oui. Parce que c'est la première fois que je dois écrire cette dissertation.
Ah d'accord. Oui. Ben, c'est comme un essai en fait. C'est un essai de 3-4 pages. De 4 heures. Voilà. C'est like an essay.
It's challenging.
Well, I think it's not the worst. You know, it's not like phonetics or grammar. You know, that's gonna be the worst. That's gonna be a terrible.
Everything's so tough.
Well, it's
in such a way, grammar. C'est facile, c'est
didactique. I mean, I've done it the day before yesterday. I did it yesterday. I'm done now. I don't want to read that anymore. I might read it while I'm eating, you know, but for lunch. But that's it.
Yeah. No, I know because.
Well, but when you read like books about didactic, it sounds logical. You know, you have this method, and then they saw that this wasn't working, so there is another method. But it's quite logical on the.
Yeah, logical and chronological.
Yes, and that's why I've done this. You know, so I made a. This is my didactic. I made this. Well, it's a bit of a mess, no? But I understand. So it's chronological, and you have all the methods.
Yeah.
you know. And all the time you have problems with the methods, so that's why you have the next one.
What was the problem of this guy? Because it was so complicated and because the instruction was so heavy.
And there was a lot of drills. And it was still imitating, you know, the kids were imitating the teacher, let's say, in the SCAV. And and because of the structuralism, you had, you know, the S. You had everything was was different. So you had the form, you had the meaning, you had the link phonetic.
Because the language was based on the structuralism.
Yes.
The language was. The language was categorized with phonetics.
Yeah. You had like different disciplines.
Syntax.
That's it. That was GAP. So it was too complicated, you know. And you know, you remember that video which she showed us with the hello, I am Mr. Oh, hello, how is your wife? Blah, blah, blah. So that's GAP. So it's very repetitive, and then you can't really use it in another context, you know. So that was a bit out of context all the time. And that's why you have the communicative approach, which is more working in a group, like the travail en groupe coming in. So you work in group, you create a situation to use the language. So it's not you have hello, my name is Mr. Smith.
Communication for learning language.
Yes, and it's constructive because the kid, the pupil, is using what he already knows, to construct a thought or a speech.
You know
what
because
I mean?
I know because of this it's called constructivism.
That's the constructivism.
Yeah, because it used enunciative linguistic. Enunciative linguistic.
Yes, I think we
because it tries to explain everything. C'est pour ça il utilise enunciative linguistique.
Oui.
Et dans l'énonciative linguistique, il travaille sur psychologie et sociopsychologie.
Oui, et là, la méthode, l'approche constructiviste, c'est l'inverse, c'est le contraire du behaviorisme. Tu vois, behaviorisme, c'est la méthode audiovisuelle.
Non, le constructivisme, oui, constructivisme avoue behaviorisme, parce que ça, qu'est-ce que je veux dire? Constructivism came from the behaviorism.
Yeah, but it takes some sort of, because the behaviorism is like they use the habits. You know, you repeat stuff, drills. So if I say apple, you say red. You know, that sort of thing. And with the constructivism, to find red, you will use other things you know already. You know.
In constructivism.
You know,
it focuses on activities of subject activities.
Yes, and group activities as well.
Group activities.
Yeah, and the highest level of this will be the TB task.
TBLT.
Where you have tasks, so you have a subject, and then you need to do something with this, or create a dialogue, or create a speech, or create a. You know.
Yeah, meaning, and I think all the things are the form or meaning are centered in TBLT instead of form. Yeah. Meaning. I don't know. How can
We'll find something to do. We'll have something to say.
Alors, juste 2-3 petites choses sur la dissertation, mais aussi, on va dire, sur le commentaire. Il faut vraiment vous dire que c'est peut-être pas forcément votre passion de rédiger des dissertations ou des commentaires, je sais que ça peut être un peu pénible. Ce qu'il faut vous dire, c'est vraiment que vous êtes là pour démontrer quelque chose. Il faut que vous avez 4 heures, donc l'idéal c'est de prendre, on va dire, 1h30 pour faire un plan et de commencer à rédiger pour être tranquille. Il faut vraiment essayer de gérer votre temps le mieux possible, d'accord, être sûr de pouvoir finir et d'être sûr d'avoir le temps de vous relire. Vous savez que de toute façon, si vous faites 5 fautes de verbe irrégulier, c'est mort, vous avez moins de 6. D'accord, on ne peut même pas lire le contenu. Donc c'est vraiment important que vous preniez le temps à la fin de vous relire. Pensez aussi que ça peut être très clair dans votre tête, mais c'est pas très clair sur le papier. D'accord, c'est vraiment un exercice en soi de communiquer vos pensées de la manière la plus claire possible, que la personne en face ait vraiment compris la complexité, la nuance qu'il y a dans vos idées. C'est vrai que souvent, on va dire, moi des fois je lis des dissertations, il y a des arguments soit qui sont très simples, soit qui je comprends rien du tout. Et ensuite quand je vais parler à l'étudiant, derrière il y a vraiment quelque chose d'intéressant. Ce que j'essaie de vous dire, c'est qu'en fait, si vous avez des problèmes pour rédiger comme ça, c'est une question d'entraînement. C'est bête et méchant, hein. C'est que vous ne pouvez pas savoir rédiger une dissertation ou un commentaire sans vous entraîner régulièrement. Donc vous en faites dans d'autres matières, vous en avez fait les années précédentes, etc. Mais n'hésitez pas, si vous voulez proposer des rédactions de paragraphes, de parties, de choses comme ça, plus vous vous entraînez, plus ce sera facile le jour même. D'accord? Rédiger une dissertation dans l'année, forcément, le jour où vous la rédigez, c'est un petit peu compliqué. Mais il faut bien vous dire que vous êtes là pour démontrer quelque chose, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut réfléchir au sujet, je ne sais pas, nature ou violence, il faut que vous puissiez résumer ce que vous avez envie de démontrer sur toute la dissertation en une phrase. D'accord? Cette phrase-là, en général, c'est une présentation de votre plan. D'accord? C'est-à-dire que votre plan, c'est un fil rouge qui déroule une argumentation, vous partez de A pour aller à B, pour aller à C, et ça, c'est votre argumentation totale sur le roman. Il faut savoir ce que vous voulez démontrer. Souvent, il y a des étudiants qui partent un petit peu dans tous les sens, genre, ah bah, je vais parler de ça maintenant, puis de ça, ils ne savent pas trop où ils vont. Si vous savez que vous voulez démontrer que la violence physique, elle est présente, machin, mais elle s'appuie sur, je dis n'importe quoi, sur une violence psychologique très forte et c'est elle qui domine dans le roman, bah voilà, c'est ce que vous allez démontrer, et là, vous pouvez avoir en tête un fil directeur et vraiment l'idée de démontrer ça. Il faut vraiment le prendre aussi comme une démonstration qui doit être irréfutable. C'est-à-dire que si vous avez un argument, si je le lis et que je peux dire « Ah bah oui, mais là ça marche pas », bah vous avez perdu. D'accord ? Si je lis votre dissertation, que tout est indémontable, que tout ce que vous avez prouvé, c'est prouvé à 100%, je ne peux rien démonter, j'ai pas d'autre choix que vous donner une bonne note, vous avez prouvé quelque chose et c'est indémontable. Donc pensez bien surtout à structurer votre argumentation et à la nuancer pour qu'elle ne soit pas démontable. D'accord? C'est-à-dire si vous dites « Ah oui, mais William, il est vraiment gentil, tout ça, c'est un personnage qui est que dans la générosité. » Wow. Attends, j'ai 152 exemples là, juste maintenant, que je peux mettre contre ça. Donc là, votre argument, il ne vaut rien. Il faut vraiment être sûr de barricader, en fait, toute votre argumentation pour que ce soit indémontable, démontré par A plus B, des choses qui sont nuancées. Si tout est démontré parfaitement, bah, vous avez forcément une bonne note. D'accord? Donc pensez bien à ça, le fait que vous êtes là pour démontrer quelque chose. On en reparlera un petit peu plus tard, mais c'est vrai qu'il faut absolument, dans le travail que vous faites, qu'il y ait ces 3 choses présentes en fait, dans votre travail final, que ce soit une dissertation ou un commentaire. Il faut que je vois que vous avez lu et compris les romans, les erreurs factuelles sur les romans. Des fois, il y a des personnes qui se trompent sur les noms des personnages. Bah c'est compliqué, d'accord? J'ai un gros doute que vous ayez lu le roman, donc c'est vraiment important que les noms des personnages ils soient précis, que les événements ils soient précis, etc. S'il y a des années à mentionner, que ce soit précis. Que je vois aussi que vous avez lu les romans, vous ne ressortez pas que ce dont on a parlé ensemble. Deuxième chose, il faut que je vois aussi que vous avez compris, on va dire, les articles que vous avez lus sur le roman. Donc, par exemple, des trucs comme Collingwood-Wittig, d'accord? N'hésitez pas à utiliser, bah tiens, elle dit ça, mais moi je vais m'y opposer. Ou alors, elle dit ça, et en effet, ça va dans le sens de la réorganisation des espaces, des personnes, je sais pas quoi. Donc, utilisez bien ça parce que ça vous aide aussi à amener un peu de sophistication à vos arguments. Et en dernier, la théorie qu'on peut faire, par exemple sur settler colonialism, les choses qu'on a fait en 2e semaine, il ne faut pas hésiter à la réutiliser aussi. D'accord? Veracini, les choses sur l'amnésie collective, etc. C'est important de pouvoir les réutiliser dans votre argumentation. Donc pensez bien à ça, essayez de regarder un moment où vous avez fini votre plan, est-ce que vous avez bien prouvé ces 3 choses-là? D'accord? Vous avez effectué le travail sur ces 3 choses-là, et entre ça et une très bonne argumentation, il n'y a pas de souci. Voilà. Et après, rappelez-vous, vous avez un lecteur. Donc le but, c'est vraiment de communiquer le plus clairement possible vos idées. Il n'y a pas besoin d'aller chercher une langue surtravaillée ou quoi que ce soit. Ce qui compte, c'est que vous arriviez à expliquer votre idée, à expliquer votre argument dans un paragraphe, et puis vous passez au suivant, etc. Ça va? Alors, on va s'amuser. Donc, je ne vous donnerai jamais ceci en examen, hein, on est d'accord? Yeah. Donc, voici un sujet dégueu, c'est dit. C'est pour se faire, pour réfléchir. Si vous pouvez déconstruire ça, vous pourrez déconstruire ce que je vous donnerai le jour d'examen, d'accord? Si ça vous y arrivez, il n'y a pas de souci pour le reste. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about whatever the hell this can mean. What am I asking you to think about in this quotation? You can do this yourself, by yourself, if you feel that you need to get your head around it, but you can also speak with the person that's next to you. What do I want from you if I'm giving you this? The concept of social class intersects in important ways with the cultural implications of colonial domination. Bang your head on this for a couple of minutes and we'll see what you have. Je vous demande de réfléchir à quoi. C'est parti, 5 ou 10 minutes selon ce dont vous avez besoin. Ça fait mal au cerveau, c'est normal.
Parce que le concept of social class came in cultural implication, and cultural implication came in colonial dimension. Colonial domination.
This is the middle phrase. This is the middle phrase. So you have two concepts basically, and they intersect together.
Concept of social class.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The social class, I think it's from the settlers' point of view. You know, you have convict, slave, free owner. These are the different classes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a concept of the social class. They're different and they have different role and
Convict.
slave and free owner.
Convict, slave and
Free owner.
free
You know,
owner.
once they're free,
Mm-hmm.
they own the land. So that's one thing. And on the other side, I would say the cultural implication of colonial domination. For me, this subject means the fact social class, the concept of social class, it's a sort of mirrored with the colonization, you know.
Domination.
They have the right to colonize the land and settle in the land because they, I don't know, this is very
You mean the convicts?
the convicts are
Replacement of convicts and free owners?
yeah, the free owners,
Free owners are
previous convicts. So they have the right to own the land.
Alright.
Okay. So it means that
What am I asking you to do?
I don't know.
What are you supposed
If
to
we have
think
this
about in this?
exam,
Who's willing to risk it?
first, I would probably first see that there are two concepts in the quotation in the subject, and they intersect together. So the concept of social class and the colonial domination, the cultural implication of the colonial domination. So the social class would be obviously from a settler's point of view, because I don't think there are social class concept in Aboriginal culture. We don't know, because we don't know a lot of things about Aboriginal in the book. So settlers can be convict, slave, or free owner, and it gives them, whether they are free owner or convict or slaves, they have the right or not to colonize, to own the land, and they have the right on the land if they're free owners. So the fact that they are not slave anymore, they become free, they have the right to own the land.
Okay. Alright. There were actually never any slaves in Australia. It was never a country that had slaves. So you've got convicts, you've got free settlers.
Yeah,
and
slave is not the...
emancipated convicts, so former convicts, and then free settlers, people who came. So you can't really talk about slaves. Not technically, there were of course people that were exploited in Australia.
What about...
not technically slaves.
So how I don't remember how it's called when William is his wife's slave?
Yeah, well he's basically a convict. He's in service.
In service.
Yeah,
yes.
he's basically in service convict. Yeah, they're not technically slaves because they had contracts and they had work a number of hours, like just 70 hours or something per week. It's good work conditions. Okay, all right. So what you got here is this is the important bit. Okay, intersects. You've got two things that intersect, and you need to think about how they intersect, whether they intersect. Okay, this is the crux basically of what is being asked. So you can see that what we're asking you to think about is how, on the one hand, you've got social classes, how they're going to intersect with that second bit there, the cultural implications of colonial domination. So as you said, for social classes, that's pretty easy-ish. As you said, this is something that comes from the settlers, mostly in British culture, and then you can think about the various social classes that are evoked, whether, well, we'll talk about this later, but whether there's any social mobility possible, is this a rigid system, how does it work, etc. How do you understand this bit? I guess this is the difficult bit, the cultural implications of cultural domination. What are we asking you to think about here? I think it's probably the bit that's complex. Is it colonial domination?
Actually, I would separate the two notions, actually. First, the cultural implications, and then the colonial domination.
Okay.
What does cultural implications means? I thought that there are either the absolute takeover of the Aborigine culture by the European culture, or you can also add new melting pot of culture to mixing culture, and a newborn culture actually came out of it. So there's two ways of seeing cultural implications. And then colonial domination, which domination are we talking about? Are we talking about force, cultural domination, or social domination, or even political domination? So if it's political domination, actually, is it the political domination of the Aborigines, or the political domination of the settlers, or the prisoners by the free settlers? So
Okay.
that's many notions, actually.
Yeah, that's a lot. I think what you're, I agree with what you're saying, that when you think about colonial domination, of course there are lots of different aspects in colonial domination. You've got a political dimension, you've got a cultural, a social, a physical dimension, etc. in cultural domination. I think in domination, this you don't actually necessarily need to discuss, because basically what you're asked to do is to think about one aspect of colonial domination, which is its cultural implications. So in a way, you're only asked, the topic asks you already to focus on this. So of course it's a good idea, as you said, to think about what this involves, but basically within this, you're being asked to just think about the cultural aspects. So basically what you're being asked to do is to think about how social class is connected or not, whether it intersects, it fuses, it mixes with the cultural implications of colonial domination. So we've said that colonial domination can include lots of forms. Okay, we talked about the physical, we can talk about the legal, political, etc. domination. Here we're asking you to think about the cultural dimension of cultural implications. So you've mentioned one example, so culture, the appropriation of culture, the destruction of the culture of the people that are colonized. What else can we include in this? What are some of the cultural changes that are brought by colonial domination? So we've got all of these cultures, but I guess we can include lots of different things. What cultural changes does colonial domination bring?
Can we talk about the names?
Yeah.
The naming of the places and stuff.
Yeah, if you want to. You could talk about the names. So it's true that you could talk about naming as a form of appropriation, and how the use of the language actually changes, enacts, in a way, it creates the possibility for colonization to exist. Definitely, you could use names. So we could consider names, we can consider how culture is appropriated. Unfortunately, there aren't many examples of this, of Aborigines having their cultures appropriated in the Secret River. What else can we say? What are some of the effects on culture of colonial domination? Culture, obviously, in a wide sense. The cultural implications.
Maybe we could talk about the connection to the land.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely you can consider the connection to the land as being a cultural dimension, and then if you think about the connection to the land and how colonial domination changed the connection to the land, you can see that obviously there's a shift from the land being used in an environmental way by Aboriginal people to the land being used in an exploitative way. If you remember, there's the example of Smasher eating all the oysters, and then an Aboriginal man explains that they shouldn't be eating all of them, and he just doesn't care. There's a very exploitative sort of, unending use of nature in this. What else can we think about? So naming, the connection to country, and how this connection might be different between settlers and Aborigines. What else could we include in this? No other ideas?
Maybe the fact that European empires impose their views and their values to the Aborigines and other.
Yeah, definitely the imposition of different views, different values, different worldviews, a different perception of the world, basically that comes through colonization. The basic example that we can give for this is the importance of English understandings of property in the colonization of Australia. If you remember that terra nullius is based basically on an understanding of land as being something that people can own only if they work it. So this basically disables Aboriginal people from being considered owners of the land. Okay, so you can also consider all of this, basically the different values that are brought by the new culture. So basically, you need to consider all of the different cultural dimensions of colonial domination. So this, as we said, can include language, it can include different values, different points of view on the culture, anything that you can think of. And if you think about the novel in detail, I'm sure you'll think about other cultural aspects of the colonial domination. This is not present in The Secret River, but we could also include the importance of education, the importance of, I don't know, lots of other things of literature. Vous savez peut-être pas, mais les premiers enseignements de littérature, ils ont eu lieu dans l'Empire britannique. C'était utilisé comme une façon de moraliser les peuples colonisés, en particulier en Inde. Les développements des départements de littérature, au départ, c'était pour ça. C'était utilisé pour les classes basses au Royaume-Uni et puis pour les coloniser. Donc il y avait une forme de moralisation qui était là derrière, l'utilisation de la culture pour ça. So you can think about all sorts of things. Of course, you'll see that education will not be particularly relevant to talk about the Secret River, but try to think about all of the different cultural aspects that are part of this. We can even think about the narrative of settler colonialism. You remember in Verasimi, he explains that there's a specific attitude to history in settler colonial narratives, this collective amnesia, the fact that people focus on settler victimology. Okay, so you can also consider this, that in the very narration of history, you're going to have a specific point of view that is adopted. So basically what the topic asks you to do is to really think about this, considering first, in The Secret River, the cultural implications of colonial domination. Are there any points where these connect with social classes? And of course, one of your the job that you'll have to do is to give a level of precision to this word, intersect. That is, do they mix with each other? Do they correspond to each other? Are there only a couple of points where you can see points of connection between social class and the cultural implications of colonial domination? So I'm going to ask you to try to think about this a little bit. Try to see in The Secret River whether you can see any points of connection between cultural domination, if you want, and social class. Je vous laisse en parler à deux si vous voulez. Essayez de voir si vous trouvez 2-3 exemples, si vous avez des idées ou au contraire si pour vous c'est 100% séparé. C'est aussi une possibilité. Je vous ai dit que c'était compliqué.
What do you think?
I think Aborigines culture was impacted on social classes. I think for example, for Thornhill, because sometimes Thornhill thought about the Aborigines civilization, and he thought they are civilized more than them, and it was a little bit challenge for Thornhill that he think about social classes between them, or they are a little bit maybe not civilized than as Aborigines people. And I gonna say maybe they're in because in Sydney a lot of people were victims, yeah,
Yeah.
and social class between victims were lower class or working class, and after coming in Sydney, their point of view was changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
and they thought
Yeah.
they had to be a gentleman like Thornhill, because he was working class in London, but in Sydney, because I don't know, because I think he thought they, because I think Thornhill thought he is more important than Aborigines.
Yes, that's for sure.
So he thought he deserved to the best, and he deserved to be a gentry class or high class, or I don't know, upper class. In fact, the environment in if you, for example, if you think about environment aspect in Sydney, this environment aspect impact on Thornhill to change their point of view of social class, because he was a working class, and after that in Sydney he thought he deserved the best and deserved to be a gentleman.
Okay. I see what you mean. I
you
understand. Yeah, I'm taking notes actually,
Yeah.
because I think that you have something there.
Yeah.
There is something very interesting. There is something very interesting.
Also, language had impact on social classes, because
Yeah.
the settler thought they have a language, and Aborigines they don't understand the language, and I think when you think about social classes, sometimes Thornhill thought the Aborigines have upper social class because they had knowledge about the land,
Yes.
and they are intelligence, and in somehow he thought the Aborigines are more have more social class than them,
Yes.
because of intelligence, because of their intelligence, and because of their knowledge about the land, and I don't know, and
All right. What do you have? What are some of the things that you thought about?
For now, it's just sort of a general thought. We were talking about a shift that takes place from the beginning in London, where Thornhill is at the bottom of the social classes, and then on the Hawkesbury, embankment, where he's on the, not on the top, but he shifted towards the top of the ladder. And at this point, he thinks his culture is sort of better than the Aborigines, who are savages for him. So they're at the bottom of that social ladder for him. But as he remembers his previous life, he has sort of compassion for them and admits that they have some knowledge, which is the nuanced Thornhill.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I see what you mean. There is a sense in which Thornhill is a little bit ambivalent in the novel. He wants to be on top, as you said, and he rises, and he, at the end, he does dismiss Aboriginal culture, and he needs that to ensure his position. On the other hand, there are lots of moments of nuance in the novel when he realizes that Aborigines are oppressed, and basically because he comes as well from an oppressed I think this is what we read last week from the Searching for the Secret River, because he comes from an oppressed background, he can also sympathize with the Aborigines. And in fact, there's a moment in the novel when he considers that Aborigines are the gentry. I think it's when they put fire to the ground, and basically this generates new shoots, and this is how they get game, like they get kangaroos and they get lots of food. So to him, they're very efficient in the sense that they've got lots of leisure time. So there are a lot of ambiguous moments, basically, where Aborigines are both represented as being on top and at the bottom in the novel. I agree with what you say. Again, you need to try to consider why we have this. Why do we have these two really opposed representations of Aborigines? Is it just a representation of Thornhill's own conflicted views, or do you feel that this is something else, something more due to other forms of ambiguities? Up to you to see that. What else did you think about for this topic?
About clothing, when settlers see nakedness as inappropriate and as kind of proof of savageness, but when Sal gives her hat to an Aboriginal woman, she plays with it, so it's kind of the other way around, like they ridicule it, I don't know what to say. They make fun of each other by the way they dress or don't dress.
Yeah, okay, alright, that can be a good argument. As you said about the use of clothes, that works quite well. For the settlers, this is a source of pride that they are dressed and that Aborigines are not dressed, and that they consider them to be savages because of that. As you said, there's a very important moment. You remember when Sal gives some hats to the Aboriginal women, and they wear it, I think they wear it on their bottoms, and they have a good laugh. Again, you can see that for each culture, the encounter with the other culture opens the possibility for parody, and also opens the possibility for feeling superior. Okay, so you've got cultural difference here that can lead to a form of hierarchy, or you can try to formulate it however you want, but you can see here that there are very different cultural implications depending on the point of view as well. That works quite well. Any other thoughts?
Maybe the Aboriginals being classless, just having tasks to do, is in a position to the British system.
Yeah. Okay. How do you connect it back to this topic? Like, how do you... do you feel that there's a complete separation between sort of British culture and colonial domination? How do you read that?
The colonizers impose their vision on the Aborigines, who has no class at the beginning, and then they are classed at the lower.
Okay. Alright. Okay, that's As I said, in this sort of topic, what you need to think about is the connection between the two. That is, are these separate? Are these together? Is this part of colonial domination? That is colonial domination in the Secret River, does it take place through the imposition of British categories, that is, of British social classes? Maybe you might consider that in colonial domination, you have in cultural implications a form of binary thinking or Eurocentrism, and that this follows the same logic, the same hierarchy as the hierarchy that is present in social classes. Je ne sais pas si vous voyez ce que je veux dire, mais en fait, l'idée de ce sujet-là, bon, c'est sûr que c'est un sujet très difficile, hein, l'idée c'est vraiment de se travailler le cerveau, on va dire, mais ici l'idée c'est de réfléchir à la façon dont ces deux interagissent. C'est-à-dire qu'il y en a un qui peut faire partie de l'autre, ils peuvent avoir la même dynamique, ils peuvent se suivre l'un l'autre, il y en a un qui peut être la conséquence d'un autre, etc. Il faut voir, vous, dans le roman, si vous considérez que les classes sociales, elles sont imposées, enfin, elles sont transférées, par exemple, dans une situation coloniale, on va utiliser ces catégories dynamiques pour interpréter la situation coloniale. C'est vrai qu'il y a plein de moments dans The Secret River où, en fait, William Thornhill, il réfléchit en termes de classe sociale. C'est-à-dire que c'est ces catégories à lui. Et dans la situation coloniale avec les aborigènes, eh ben, il réfléchit en utilisant la même chose. C'est pour ça qu'il réfléchit aux aborigènes comme étant the gentry. Il y a aussi, là on n'en a pas parlé, mais dans les histoires de classe sociale, il y a toute sa relation avec les deux prisonniers qui travaillent chez lui, Ned et Dan. C'est là vraiment où il essaye de devenir quelqu'un qui est un peu plus important. Il parle différemment, il essaie d'imposer une distance alors qu'il connaissait Dan de Londres, etc. Donc c'est à vous de voir si vous considérez qu'il y a un transfert, une utilisation de ça dans la domination par Thornhill. Sinon, vous pouvez aussi considérer assez, on va dire, de manière un peu plus systématique que une des implications culturelles de la colonisation, c'est quoi? C'est d'avoir une forme de réflexion binaire. Vous vous rappelez ce discours colonial, noir, blanc, et aussi de l'eurocentrisme. Donc vous pouvez considérer que ça constitue une forme de hiérarchie, et que cette forme de hiérarchie, c'est exactement la même logique que la hiérarchie qui a lieu avec les classes sociales en Angleterre. D'accord? Donc vous pouvez considérer que c'est un processus similaire, mais qui a lieu en parallèle, ou alors qui se mélange. C'est à vous de voir, selon les exemples que vous trouvez, si vous considérez que classe sociale et domination culturelle, en fait, se mélangent, ou alors si c'est vraiment le même type de logique qui se déploie en des termes un petit peu différents. Ça va? Donc, bien entendu, ceci ne sera pas un examen. Ça ne serait pas vraiment sympathique du tout. Mais c'est vrai que vous pouvez vous poser la question, notamment la domination culturelle coloniale, elle est basée sur des hiérarchies raciales. D'accord? La discrimination raciale, elle vient beaucoup de la domination coloniale. Donc vous pouvez aussi réfléchir, en gros, au parallèle entre hiérarchie raciale et hiérarchie sociale. Et c'est vrai que dans The Secret River, vous avez pas mal de moments où ça se mélange, en fait. C'est-à-dire que les deux sont combinés comme forme de hiérarchie. Et Thornhill lui-même, il ne sait pas trop dans quel sens il est censé réfléchir. Il y a, comme on disait, il y a pas mal d'oppositions dans The Secret River qui viennent des contradictions internes de Thornhill, qui quelque part comprend la situation des aborigènes, mais n'a pas envie de comprendre parce que finalement, ça l'arrange pas. Ici. Yes. Ça va? Alright. On refera des exercices sur les dissertations, les commentaires, etc. N'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions entre-temps. Je vous donne juste vos devoirs pour la semaine prochaine. Donc pour la semaine prochaine, il y a deux choses à faire. La première, c'est de lire les pages 15 à 18 du fascicule. C'est les dernières pages de Searching for the Secret River. Vous allez voir à quel point l'ancêtre de Kate Granville était très sympathique. Et la deuxième chose, c'est que je vous demande de lire page 41-42, les trois premiers poèmes de Judith Wright. Donc si je ne dis pas de bêtises, c'est Borrow Ring, Niggas Leap et Old House. D'accord? Les trois premiers. Donc regardez, essayez de voir ce que vous comprenez. Et voilà. Ça marche? See you next week.
Moi, je ne viens pas là.
Ah non, moi non plus.
C'est vrai?
Moi non plus.
Tu veux étudier didactique?
Non plus.